The wrench slipped from my fingers and clattered against the concrete garage floor. Oil stains had been accumulating there for 15 years, each one marking another weekend spent fixing what everyone else threw away. That's what I did. Victor Mercer, the guy who made broken things work again. You're pathetic, Vic. Dominique's voice cut through the humid August air like a blade through tissue paper. She stood in the doorway between the house and garage, silhouetted against the kitchen light, her designer heels clicking impatiently on the threshold. I didn't look up from the engine bay of my 2008 Ford pickup. The alternator belt needed replacing, and unlike my wife's problems, this was something I could actually fix. Good evening to you too, honey. Don't honey me. Her voice carried that particular edge she'd perfected over the past 3 years, sharp enough to cut glass, cold enough to freeze water. I've been thinking about us, about what we've become. And what have we become? I straightened up, wiping my hands on the shop rag that had seen better decades. The garage felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. 22 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the tone that preceded life-changing conversations. Dominique stepped fully into the garage, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the workbench, where I kept my tools organized with military precision. Everything in its place, everything serving a purpose, unlike whatever was happening between us. We've become roommates, Vic, strangers sharing a mortgage. She picked up a socket wrench, examined it like it was some alien artifact, then set it down with deliberate care. When was the last time you took charge of anything? When did you last make a decision that mattered? The question hung in the air between us like smoke from an engine fire. I could have mentioned the decision to refinance the house at a better rate, saving us $400 monthly, or the choice to invest in municipal bonds instead of her preferred high-risk stocks, protecting our retirement from market volatility. But Dominique wasn't talking about financial decisions. I make decisions every day, I said, reaching for the replacement belt. Some of us just don't announce them with fanfare. That's exactly what I mean. She moved closer, and I caught the scent of her perfume, something expensive she'd started wearing recently. Not the vanilla fragrance she'd worn for years, but something sharper, more aggressive. You react to everything. You never initiate. You never take control. I threaded the new belt around the pulleys, focusing on the mechanical precision required to keep the engine running smoothly. Tension mattered. Too loose and the belt would slip. Too tight and it would snap under pressure. Control isn't the same thing as being controlling, Nikki. She flinched at the nickname. I'd called her Nikki since our third date, back when she laughed at my jokes and didn't mind that I worked with my hands for a living. Back when she thought my steady nature was stability instead of weakness. My ex knows how to take control, she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that preceded her most devastating observations. Garrett never hesitated to make decisions. He never sat back and let life happen to him. You just sit there like a dog. The belt tensioner clicked into place with a satisfying snap, everything aligned perfectly, ready to transfer power where it needed to go. I closed the hood and turned to face my wife of 22 years, the mother of my 2 children, the woman who'd just compared me to a household pet. I smiled. Not the warm smile I'd given her on our wedding day, or the proud smile I'd worn when she got promoted to senior account executive at Morrison & Associates. This smile carried no warmth at all, just the quiet satisfaction of a decision finally crystallizing in my mind. Funny thing about dogs, I said, hanging the wrench on its designated hook. They bite if you kick them enough. Dominique blinked, clearly expecting a different response. Maybe an argument, or one of my usual attempts to smooth things over with humor and patience. Instead, I walked past her toward the house, pausing only to flip off the garage lights. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To bed," I said without turning around. "Got an early day tomorrow." That night, I lay awake listening to Dominique's breathing beside me, studying the ceiling fan that wobbled slightly on every third rotation. Another thing that needed fixing, added to a list that seemed to grow longer every year. The house demanded constant maintenance, leaky faucets, loose hinges, windows that stuck in their frames. I'd addressed each problem methodically, the same way I approached everything else in life. But some problems couldn't be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. I'd met Garrett Stone exactly once, at a company barbecue 3 years ago. He owned Stone Development, one of those real estate firms that bought up struggling properties and transformed them into luxury condominiums. Tall, confident, with the kind of easy charm that made people want to agree with whatever he suggested. He'd spent 20 minutes explaining how my neighborhood was ripe for revitalization, which apparently meant bulldozing houses like mine to build trendy lofts for young professionals. Dominique had hung on every word. At 5:30 a.m., I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to the kitchen. Coffee first, then planning. The morning routine I'd followed for 15 years suddenly felt different, charged with purpose instead of habit. I wasn't just starting another day, I was beginning something entirely new. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the quiet house with familiar sounds. Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Patterson walking her ancient beagle down Maple Street, both of them moving with the careful deliberation of creatures who understood their limitations. The dog had probably been energetic once, eager to please and quick to forgive, but time and neglect had a way of changing things. My phone buzzed against the counter. A text from my foreman, Mike Latham. Johnson project running behind. Need you on site by 7. I typed back, taking a personal day. Handle the crew. Mike had worked construction for 30 years, the last 8 as my second-in-command at Mercer Contracting. He could manage one day without me hovering over his shoulder, making sure every measurement was precise and every joint was square. Some situations required a different kind of precision. Upstairs, Dominique's alarm would sound in 2 hours. She'd shower, apply her makeup with the same careful attention she gave to advertising campaigns, then drive to Morrison and Associates in the BMW I'd helped her finance. A normal Tuesday morning in a life that had become predictably comfortable. But comfort was a luxury I could no longer afford. I opened my laptop and navigated to our bank's website, entering login credentials I'd memorized years ago. Joint checking, joint savings, the money market account we'd opened when Ross started college. Every shared financial decision we'd made, every dollar we'd saved together, every investment in our supposed future. The first transfer took 30 seconds, checking to savings, then savings to my personal account at First National, the one I'd maintained since before our marriage, back when independence seemed important. The second transfer moved our emergency fund, money we'd accumulated slowly over 2 decades of careful budgeting. Each click felt like removing a rivet from a bridge that had supported too much weight for too long. By 6:45, our joint accounts showed balances of $0 I dressed quietly, choosing clothes I could work in, jeans, work boots, a flannel shirt that had seen 1,000 job sites. The same uniform I'd worn to build the life Dominique now found insufficient. In the hallway, I paused outside Ross's old bedroom, now converted to Dominique's home office. Her laptop sat closed on the desk, surrounded by marketing materials and client presentations. The laptop she'd left unlocked 3 nights ago while taking a phone call. The laptop that had shown me text messages I was never supposed to see. Messages that explained the new perfume, the late nights at the office, the sudden dissatisfaction with everything I provided. Messages that made her comparison to Garrett Stone feel less like casual observation and more like active betrayal. I'd screenshotted everything before she returned, storing the evidence in a folder labeled Property Assessments, where she'd never think to look. Now those screenshots would serve a different purpose than I'd originally imagined. My truck started on the first try, the new alternator belt humming smoothly as the engine warmed up. I backed out of the driveway, noting the precise time on the dashboard clock. 7:23 a.m. In approximately 90 minutes, Dominique would wake up to discover what happened when you pushed a patient man too far. The morning air felt different as I drove through our neighborhood, past houses where other couples were probably having coffee together, discussing their days, sharing the small intimacies that made marriage feel worthwhile. I'd wanted that life once, had believed I was building it, one careful decision at a time, but wanting something and deserving it were different things entirely. My phone rang as I turned onto Highway 34, heading toward the Lake District where successful people built weekend retreats. Mike's name appeared on the caller ID, probably wondering why I'd abandoned the Johnson project without explanation. I let it go to voicemail. The lake house sat on 12 acres of prime waterfront, accessible only by a private road that wound through old-growth pine trees. I'd driven past the entrance dozens of times over the years, never imagining I'd have reason to visit. The mailbox read, "Stone's Throw," the kind of cute wordplay that probably seemed clever after 3 glasses of wine. I parked a quarter-mile away, behind an abandoned gas station that had been closed since the interstate bypass redirected traffic. The walk through the woods would take 15 minutes, long enough to appreciate the irony of my situation. Here I was, stalking through underbrush like some character from a bad movie, all because my wife thought I lacked initiative. The trees thinned as I approached the lake, revealing a sprawling cedar and glass structure that probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the water, while a wraparound deck suggested lazy afternoons spent contemplating the natural beauty money could buy. 2 cars sat in the circular driveway, Dominique's BMW and a silver Mercedes that had to belong to Garrett. So much for her story about visiting her sister in Columbus. I settled behind a fallen oak tree, approximately 50 yards from the house, and pulled out my phone. The camera had decent zoom capabilities, enough to document whatever was happening inside those expensive windows. Not that I needed more evidence of their affair. The text messages had been explicit enough to remove any doubt. But evidence and leverage were different things entirely. At 9:47 a.m., they appeared on the deck. Dominique wore a silk robe I'd never seen before, while Garrett had wrapped himself in a towel that emphasized his gym-sculpted physique. They looked comfortable together, familiar in the way that suggested this wasn't their first morning at the lake house. I started recording. They talked for several minutes, Dominique gesturing toward the water while Garrett nodded and smiled. Probably discussing their future together, making plans that didn't include the husband who'd financed her BMW and supported her career ambitions, the husband who'd apparently failed to provide the excitement she craved. Then Garrett's phone rang. Even from 50 yards away, I could see his expression change as he answered. His relaxed posture stiffened, and he began pacing the deck with the agitated energy of someone receiving very bad news. Dominique moved closer, clearly trying to overhear the conversation. When he ended the call, Garrett threw his phone against the deck railing hard enough that I heard the impact echo across the water. Dominique reached for him, but he pulled away, stalking toward the house with the kind of angry urgency that suggested their romantic morning had taken an unexpected turn. She followed, her silk robe fluttering behind her like a flag of surrender. I stopped recording and checked the timestamp. 11 minutes and 37 seconds of footage that would prove useful very soon. The walk back to my truck felt different than the approach, lighter somehow, as if documenting their affair had transferred some invisible weight from my shoulders to theirs. I'd spent 3 days wrestling with what to do about Dominique's betrayal, torn between confrontation and denial, between fighting for our marriage and accepting its end. But her words last night had clarified everything. You just sit there like a dog. Dogs were loyal creatures, bred for thousands of years to serve and protect their human families. They offered unconditional love, patient devotion, and faithful companionship, even when their owners took them for granted. Most dogs lived their entire lives without ever biting the hand that fed them, but every dog had limits. My phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, all from Dominique. I scrolled through them while sitting in the truck, watching her panic escalate from confusion to anger to something approaching desperation. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? What did you do to our accounts? This isn't funny, Vic. Call me back right now. The final message, sent just 2 minutes ago, contained only 3 words. I'm coming home. I started the truck and pulled onto Highway 34, heading in the opposite direction. Home was the last place I wanted to be when Dominique discovered the full extent of what her patient, obedient husband had accomplished in a single morning. The Riverside Motel hadn't been updated since the 1970s, but it offered 2 things I needed: rooms by the week and management that didn't ask uncomfortable questions. The desk clerk, a woman whose weathered face suggested she'd seen everything at least twice, handed me a key without looking up from her crossword puzzle. Room 12, she said. Checkout's at 11, but nobody really cares. The room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, furnished with the kind of furniture that had survived decades of temporary occupants. A bed, a dresser, a small table with 2 chairs, and a television that probably received 6 channels on a clear day. Not exactly luxury accommodations, but luxury hadn't been the goal. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally returned Dominique's call. She answered before the first ring finished. Where the hell are you? Taking control, I said. This isn't funny, Vic. I came home and half your clothes are gone. The accounts are empty. What did you do? I listened to my wife's advice. I could hear her moving around the house, probably checking rooms to catalog what I'd taken. You said I never make decisions that matter, so I made one. You can't just disappear with our money. My money, I corrected. Earned by my company, deposited in accounts that required both our signatures to open, but only one to close. Amazing what you can accomplish when you plan ahead. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Dominique's voice returned, lower and more controlled. What do you want? I want you to remember this feeling, I said. The helplessness of discovering that someone you trusted has been making plans without telling you. The frustration of realizing you never saw it coming. You're scaring me. Good. Fear means you're finally paying attention. I ended the call and turned off the phone. Outside the motel window, traffic moved steadily along the highway, people heading to jobs, appointments, lives that continued regardless of my personal drama. The world didn't stop spinning just because one marriage had finally collapsed under the weight of accumulated resentments. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just holding everything together. The dog had learned to bite. 3 days of silence had given me time to plan. The motel room had become my command center, furnished with everything I needed to dismantle a life I'd spent 2 decades building. Laptop, phone charger, legal pads covered with careful notes, and a cooler stocked with sandwiches and energy drinks. I'd learned to live efficiently during my construction days, when job sites demanded improvisation and self-sufficiency. Those skills were serving me well now. My phone showed 47 missed calls from Dominique, 12 from our daughter Amelia, and 3 from my son Ross. I'd listen to the voicemails eventually, but not yet. Right now, I needed to focus on the next phase of what Dominique would probably call my midlife crisis, but which I preferred to think of as long overdue course correction. The laptop screen displayed Morrison & Associates employee directory, accessible through their public website. Dominique had mentioned her co-workers often enough that I could match names to faces, building a mental map of her professional relationships. Dave Millant, her direct supervisor. Sasha Klein, her best friend and fellow account executive. Jennifer Walsh, the office manager who handled HR complaints. People who thought they knew my wife, but who'd never seen the text messages I'd discovered. Messages that painted a very different picture of Dominique's character than the professional facade she maintained at work. I'd printed the most damaging screenshots, organizing them in a folder that would make interesting reading for the right person. But timing mattered. Release the information too early, and Dominique would have time to craft explanations, control the narrative, minimize the damage. Wait too long, and she might find ways to discredit the source. The key was patience, something I'd had plenty of practice with. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike Latham. "Boss, we need to talk. Johnson Project is falling apart without you." I typed back, "Handle it. I trust your judgment." Mike had been asking to take on more responsibility for months, complaining that I micromanaged every decision instead of delegating to experienced crew members. Now he'd get his chance to prove himself, while I focused on more pressing matters. The BMW dealership on 5th Street opened at 9 a.m. I'd called ahead, explaining that my wife had lost her keys and needed a replacement set. The service manager, a helpful young man named Kevin, had assured me that bringing the title and registration would be sufficient to verify ownership. Both documents were filed in my home office, along with insurance papers and maintenance records for every vehicle we'd ever owned. Dominique handled the creative side of our partnership, but I'd always managed the practical details. Amazing how useful those details could become when circumstances changed. Kevin handed me the spare keys with a smile. "Tell your wife we can program the remote starter if she brings the car in next week." "I'll mention it," I said, pocketing the keys that would give me access to Dominique's movements, her schedule, and most importantly, her phone. The Find My iPhone feature was wonderfully convenient for worried spouses who needed to locate missing partners. All it required was access to the target device and knowledge of the Apple ID password, information I'd acquired months ago when helping Dominique troubleshoot her email settings. Now I could track her location in real time, watching the blue dot move across the digital map as she went about her day, probably telling friends and co-workers that her husband had suffered some kind of breakdown. The poor woman, married to a man who'd finally snapped under the pressure of her success and independence. If only they knew the whole story. Morrison and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of the Riverside building, a glass and steel monument to corporate ambition that had been constructed during the city's brief economic renaissance in the early 2000s. I'd never visited Dominique's office, but she'd described it often enough. Corner windows, modern furniture, the kind of professional environment that made her feel important. The parking garage beneath the building offered excellent surveillance opportunities. I could sit in my truck, monitoring the entrance while staying invisible among dozens of other vehicles. Just another construction worker taking a break, nothing suspicious about that. Dominique's BMW appeared at 11:47 a.m., later than her usual arrival time. She parked in her assigned spot and sat in the car for several minutes, probably psyching herself up for another day of pretending everything was normal. From 50 yards away, I could see her checking her phone, no doubt hoping for some message from me that would explain my disappearance. She'd be waiting a long time. Sasha Klein emerged from the elevator at 12:15, walking directly to Dominique's car. Even from a distance, their body language suggested intense conversation, lots of gesturing, leaning close together, the kind of animated discussion that indicated crisis management. Sasha had probably become Dominique's primary confidant, the friend who offered support and advice during this difficult time, which made her the perfect source of information about Dominique's state of mind. I'd researched Sasha thoroughly over the past 3 days. Divorced 2 years ago, lived alone in a trendy loft downtown, drove a leased Audi that probably consumed most of her disposable income. According to social media, she enjoyed wine bars, yoga classes, and posting inspirational quotes about female empowerment. The kind of woman who'd encourage her friend to leave an unsatisfying marriage in pursuit of authentic happiness. The kind of woman who might be willing to share details about that friend's personal life with the right person under the right circumstances. I waited until Sasha returned to the building, then followed her BMW to the parking garage exit. The tracking device I'd purchased from a security supply store was smaller than a pack of cigarettes, equipped with a magnetic mount that would attach to any metal surface. Installation took less than 30 seconds, hidden beneath the rear bumper where casual inspection would never reveal it. Now I could monitor both women's movements without leaving the motel room. The afternoon brought interesting developments. According to the tracking data, Dominique left work at 3:30, 2 hours earlier than normal, and drove directly home. She stayed there for 45 minutes, probably searching for clues about my plans or evidence of where I'd gone. Then she drove to Sasha's apartment, remaining there until almost midnight. Crisis management indeed. The next morning, I dressed carefully for my performance. Clean jeans, a button-down shirt, work boots, polished to a respectable shine. The goal was to appear slightly disheveled but not threatening. A man struggling with personal problems, seeking understanding from his wife's friends. Sasha lived in the riverfront lofts, a converted warehouse that had been transformed into upscale apartments for young professionals who wanted to live downtown. The lobby featured exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, and the kind of industrial chic design that suggested authenticity while costing twice as much as traditional housing. I waited across the street until Sasha emerged for her morning run, then approached as she stretched against a lamppost. She recognized me immediately. We'd met at several company parties over the years, though we'd never had much reason to talk. "Vic?" She straightened up, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for answers," I said, letting exhaustion creep into my voice. "Dominique won't return my calls. I thought maybe you could help me understand what's happening." Sasha's expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been sympathy. "She's really hurt, Vic. Disappearing like that, taking all the money. That's not like you." "Nothing's like me anymore." I ran a hand through my hair, a gesture I'd practiced in the motel mirror. "I feel like I'm losing my mind. One day we're married, the next day she's telling me I'm not the man she needs. I don't even know what that means." "Maybe we should talk somewhere private," Sasha said, glancing around the busy street. "There's a coffee shop around the corner." The Grind occupied the ground floor of another converted warehouse, decorated with salvaged furniture and local artwork that probably cost more than my truck. We found a corner table away from the morning crowd, and I ordered black coffee, while Sasha requested something complicated involving oat milk and extra foam. "Dominique cares about you," she began, once the barista delivered our drinks. "But she's been unhappy for a long time. You have to know that." "I thought we were building something together," I said. "The house, the business, planning for retirement. When did that stop being enough?" Sasha stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "It's not about enough, Vic. It's about feeling alive, feeling desired. When was the last time you surprised her? When did you last make her feel like she was the most important thing in your world? I work 60 hours a week to give her the life she wants. But that's not what she wants." Sasha leaned forward, warming to her subject. She wants passion, adventure, a man who takes charge instead of just providing. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, Sasha gradually revealing more than she probably intended. Dominique's frustration with our routine, her attraction to men who made bold gestures, her belief that I'd become complacent, taking our marriage for granted while she grew increasingly restless. She mentioned an ex-boyfriend, I said carefully, someone who knew how to take control. Sasha's expression flickered, just for a moment, but long enough to confirm what I'd suspected. "Garrett Stone. They dated in college before she met you. He's different from you." "Different how?" "Confident, decisive. He owns that development company, Stone Properties. Very successful." She paused, seeming to realize she'd said too much. "But that's ancient history. Dominique chose you, Vic. She married you. And now she's reconsidering that choice." Sasha didn't deny it. I finished my coffee and stood to leave, letting my shoulders slump with apparent defeat. "Thank you for being honest. I know you're trying to protect her, but I needed to understand." "Vic, wait." Sasha reached across the table, her fingers brushing my wrist. "You're a good man. Maybe too good for your own good. Dominique doesn't know what she's throwing away." "Maybe she does," I said. Maybe she's right to want something better. I left Sasha sitting in the coffee shop, probably feeling sorry for the broken husband who'd just confirmed every negative thing Dominique had said about our marriage. The performance had gone exactly as planned, extracting information while reinforcing the image of a man too passive to pose any real threat. But the most interesting part of our conversation hadn't been what Sasha said. It had been what she'd avoided saying. Her reaction to Garrett Stone's name had been too quick, too defensive. The kind of response that suggested personal knowledge rather than secondhand information. Combined with the late-night visit to Dominique's house and the frequent phone calls I'd been monitoring, it painted a picture of involvement that went beyond friendship and support. Sasha Klein wasn't just helping Dominique navigate her marital problems. She was actively participating in whatever came next. Back at the motel, I spread the surveillance photos across the small table, creating a timeline of the past week's activities. Dominique's trips to the lake house, Sasha's visits to our home, the pattern of phone calls and text messages that suggested coordination rather than casual friendship. They were planning something together, something that required secrecy and careful timing, something I needed to understand before they implemented it. The laptop screen displayed Garrett Stone's business website, complete with professional photos and a biography that read like a resume designed to impress potential investors. Local boy made good, college football scholarship, MBA from Northwestern, founder and CEO of Stone Development. The kind of success story that made other men feel inadequate by comparison. No wonder Dominique found him appealing. But successful men had more to lose than failed husbands. They had reputations to protect, business relationships to maintain, public images that could be damaged by scandal. They had vulnerabilities that patient, observant men might be able to exploit, if they were foolish enough to underestimate the opposition. My phone buzzed with another text from Dominique. "We need to talk. This has gone far enough." I typed back, "I agree. Tomorrow night. The house. Come alone." Her response arrived within seconds. "Thank you. We can work this out." Maybe we could, but probably not in the way she was imagining. I spent the evening reviewing my notes, checking and rechecking the evidence I'd compiled, making sure every detail was accurate and verifiable. Tomorrow night would determine whether the past week had been an elaborate tantrum or the opening move in a longer game. Either way, the dog was done sitting quietly. The house felt different when I returned. Smaller somehow, as if my week-long absence had shrunk the spaces I'd once considered home. Dominique had rearranged the living room furniture, moving my recliner to face away from the television and replacing it with a decorative chair that looked expensive and uncomfortable. Even my temporary exile had become an opportunity for redecorating. I walked through each room methodically, cataloging the changes. New throw pillows in the bedroom, different artwork in the hallway. The coffee maker I'd used every morning for 15 years replaced with some complicated espresso machine that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment. She was erasing me piece by piece, transforming our shared space into something that reflected her taste alone. But she'd missed the most important changes, the ones that weren't visible to casual inspection. The security cameras I'd installed were smaller than matchboxes, hidden behind picture frames and inside decorative objects where they'd record everything while remaining completely invisible. Professional-grade equipment designed for contractors who needed to monitor job sites, now repurposed for domestic surveillance. The audio recording devices were even smaller, tucked into lamp bases and behind furniture where they'd capture every conversation with crystal clarity. By the time Dominique arrived, the house would be documenting everything that happened within its walls. She pulled into the driveway at exactly 8 p.m., punctual as always. Through the living room window, I watched her sit in the BMW for several minutes, probably gathering courage for what she expected to be a difficult conversation. She'd dressed carefully, not the casual clothes she wore around the house, but the kind of outfit she reserved for important meetings. Professional but approachable, designed to project competence, while inviting cooperation. She thought she was coming to negotiate. "Hello, Vic." She entered through the front door, keys jingling with nervous energy. "Thank you for agreeing to talk." "Our house," I said from the kitchen doorway, seemed like the appropriate place. She moved into the living room, choosing the new chair instead of the couch we'd shared for countless evenings. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. She wanted distance, formality, the kind of positioning that suggested business rather than intimacy. "I've been worried about you," she began. "Disappearing like that, taking the money. It's not like you to be so impulsive. Maybe you don't know me as well as you thought. I know you're angry. You have every right to be. The things I said the other night were cruel and unfair." She leaned forward slightly, employing the body language techniques she'd learned in sales training. "I was frustrated with our situation, but I took it out on you instead of addressing the real problems." "And what are the real problems?" Dominique hesitated, clearly having prepared for this question. "We've grown apart, Vic. Somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and became roommates. We go through the motions of marriage without any of the passion or connection that made us fall in love." "Passion?" I repeated. "Is that what you call it? Don't you miss it? The excitement of those early years, when everything felt new and possible? When we couldn't wait to see each other at the end of the day?" I moved to the couch, maintaining eye contact while positioning myself where the hidden cameras would capture both of our faces. "I remember working 80-hour weeks to build the business while you finished your degree. I remember postponing vacations and driving used cars so we could afford the house you wanted. I remember choosing stability over excitement because that's what adults do. But we don't have to choose anymore." Her voice carried a note of eagerness that suggested we were approaching the real purpose of her visit. "The business is established. The kids are grown. We have options now that we didn't have 20 years ago. Such as? We could travel, take risks, explore parts of ourselves that we've neglected while focusing on responsibilities." She stood and moved closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, still the new scent, not the vanilla fragrance I'd loved. We could remember what it feels like to be alive instead of just existing. It was a good speech, probably rehearsed multiple times with Sasha's input. The right balance of acknowledgement and possibility, designed to make me feel heard while opening the door to whatever she'd actually come to propose. But she'd made one critical error. "When did you start wearing that perfume?" I asked. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "The perfume. It's different from what you usually wear. When did you change?" A few months ago. I wanted to try something new." She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough to hide the flicker of panic in her eyes. "Why does that matter?" "Just curious about when you started making changes." I leaned back against the couch cushions, adopting the relaxed posture that had always annoyed her. "What else have you been trying that's new?" "Vic, I don't understand what you're getting at." "I think you do." The silence stretched between us, like a wire under tension. Dominique returned to her chair, crossing her legs and smoothing her skirt with the kind of nervous gestures that betrayed her growing discomfort. The confident woman who'd entered 20 minutes ago was being replaced by someone less certain of her ground. "I made mistakes," she said finally. "I let myself get caught up in fantasies about what life could be like instead of focusing on what we have together. But that doesn't mean our marriage is over. We can fix this, Vic. We can rebuild what we've lost. With Garrett Stone's help?" The name hit her like a physical blow. Color drained from her face, and her hands gripped the chair arms hard enough that her knuckles turned white. For several seconds, she didn't speak at all, probably calculating how much I knew and how much damage control would be required. "How did you—" She stopped herself, recognizing the trap. "Find out?" I reached into my jacket pocket and withdrew the printed screenshots, fanning them across the coffee table like playing cards. Amazing what people will put in text messages these days. Dominique stared at the papers as if they were evidence of some crime she'd forgotten committing. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, and she pressed one hand against her chest in a gesture I recognized from her anxiety attacks during the early years of our marriage. You went through my phone. Your laptop, actually. You left it unlocked Tuesday night when Jennifer called about the Morrison account. I picked up one of the screenshots, pretending to read it for the first time. Very detailed messages, Nikki. I particularly enjoyed the part where you described what you wanted to do to him at the lake house. Those were private conversations. Between my wife and her lover, that makes them my business. She stood abruptly, pacing to the window where she could look out at the street instead of meeting my eyes. It's not what you think. Really? Because I think you've been having an affair with your college boyfriend for at least 3 months. I think you've been using our house for planning sessions with Sasha Klein. And I think you came here tonight to ask for a divorce so you could be with Garrett without the inconvenience of explaining yourself. You don't understand the whole situation. Then explain it to me. Dominique turned from the window, and I saw something in her expression that I'd never seen before, not just guilt or embarrassment, but genuine fear, the kind of fear that suggested the stakes were higher than simple adultery. Garrett and we have history, complicated history that never really ended, even after I married you. She returned to the chair, but remained perched on the edge as if ready to flee. When he moved back to town 3 years ago, we ran into each other at that company barbecue. One thing led to another. One thing being drinks, another being his bed. It wasn't supposed to happen. I love you, Vic. I've always loved you, but Garrett represents a part of my life that I thought was gone forever. Being with him makes me remember who I used to be before I became just a wife and mother. Just a wife and mother, I repeated. The life I worked 16 hours a day to provide. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. I gathered the screenshots and returned them to my pocket. You've decided that the life we built together isn't exciting enough anymore, so you've been test driving a replacement while keeping me around to pay the bills. It's not like that. Then what is it like? Dominique was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Garrett asked me to marry him. The words lingered between us like smoke after a house blaze. I'd expected the affair, had proof of the deception, had even anticipated that she might want a divorce. But hearing her admit she'd been planning a future with another man while sharing a bed with me created a hollow feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with shock and everything to do with the collapse of something I'd spent 22 years building. When? I asked. Last weekend. At the lake house. And what did you tell him? I told him I needed time to figure out how to handle the situation with you. She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since I'd mentioned Garrett's name. I never wanted to hurt you, Vic. You're a good man. You deserve better than this. I deserve honesty. I deserve loyalty. I deserve a wife who doesn't compare me to other men and find me lacking. You're right. You deserve all of those things. Tears began forming in her eyes, though whether from genuine remorse or fear of consequences was impossible to determine. But I can't be the woman who gives them to you anymore. I've tried to convince myself that what we have is enough, but it's not. I need something different. You need Garrett Stone. I need to feel alive again. I stood and walked to the mantel where we'd displayed family photos for 15 years, wedding pictures, vacation snapshots, images of birthday parties and graduations, and all the moments that had seemed important enough to preserve. Now they looked like evidence of a life that had been built on false assumptions. What's your plan? I asked without turning around. I want us to separate, quietly, without drama or lawyers if possible. We divide the assets fairly, share custody of whatever relationship we maintain with the kids, and try to end this with dignity intact. While you move in with Garrett. Eventually, Yes. And Sasha's role in all this? Another hesitation. She's been helping me figure out how to approach the situation. She went through a divorce 2 years ago, so she understands the process. She understands more than the process. I turned from the mantel to find Dominique watching me with the kind of wary attention she might give a dangerous animal. What do you mean? Sasha's been to the lake house, Nikki, multiple times. The tracking device on her car shows regular visits, usually when you're there too. I moved closer, noting how she pressed back into the chair as if trying to maintain distance. What exactly has she been helping you figure out? I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I think Sasha's involvement goes beyond offering friendly advice about divorce proceedings. I think she's been actively participating in your relationship with Garrett. The accusation hit home. Dominique's face went pale again, and she gripped the chair arms with enough force that I could see her fingernails digging into the fabric. You're being paranoid. Am I? Because the evidence suggests that my wife, her best friend, and her lover have been planning something together, something that requires secrecy and coordination, something that probably involves more than just ending our marriage. Vic, please. What are you really after, Nikki? What's the end game here? She stood abruptly, moving toward the door with the quick, nervous energy of someone who'd lost control of a situation. I should go. This isn't the conversation I wanted to have, but it's the conversation we're having. I'll call you tomorrow, when you've had time to process everything. I've had a week to process, now I want answers. But she was already at the door, fumbling with the handle in her haste to escape. Tomorrow, Vic. I promise we'll talk tomorrow. And then she was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her new perfume and the echo of admissions that had revealed far more than she'd intended. I waited until her tail lights disappeared down the street, before retrieving the laptop and reviewing the footage the hidden cameras had captured. Every word, every gesture, every moment of panic when she realized how much I knew, evidence that would prove useful when the time came for more public confrontations. But the most valuable information hadn't come from what she'd said, it had come from what she'd refused to say. Sasha Klein wasn't just a supportive friend helping Dominique navigate a difficult divorce. She was a co-conspirator in something larger and more complex than simple adultery. The tracking data, the coordinated visits, the careful timing of their activities, it all pointed to a level of planning that suggested significant stakes. Stakes high enough that they'd underestimated the man they were plotting against. I opened a new document on the laptop and began typing, organizing everything I'd learned into a timeline that would help me understand their strategy. If Dominique wanted to play games with other people's lives, she was about to discover that some opponents were more dangerous than they appeared. The dog had learned to bite. Now it was time to draw some serious pain. The storm had been building all afternoon, dark clouds rolling in from the west like an invading army. By 8 p.m., rain was hammering the motel room windows hard enough to rattle the glass, while thunder shook the building's foundation every few minutes. Perfect weather for what I had planned. I'd spent 3 days studying the lake house property, memorizing every approach route and security feature. Garrett's weekend retreat might look impressive from the water, but it had been designed for comfort rather than defense. Motion sensors covered the main driveway and front entrance, but the service road used by maintenance crews remained unmonitored. The security system was expensive but predictable, the kind of setup that deterred casual intruders while remaining vulnerable to someone with patience and planning, someone like me. The tracking devices showed all 3 targets at the lake house, Dominique's BMW, Sasha's Audi, and Garrett's Mercedes, clustered in the circular driveway like conspirators gathering for a final meeting. According to the audio surveillance I'd planted in our house, they were planning to finalize their strategy tonight, making decisions that would determine how they'd handle the Vic problem going forward. They'd chosen the perfect location for their planning session, isolated, private, surrounded by enough wilderness that no one would hear raised voices or breaking glass. Unfortunately for them, isolation worked both ways. I parked the truck 2 miles away, behind the same abandoned gas station I'd used for my first surveillance mission. The walk through the woods would take 30 minutes in good weather, probably 45 with the storm reducing visibility to a few yards. But the rain would also mask any sound I made approaching the house, and the lightning would provide convenient cover for activities that required darkness. The waterproof bag contained everything I'd need: bolt cutters for the security fence, a glass cutter for silent entry, zip ties for restraint, and a digital recorder to document whatever confessions I might extract. No weapons beyond what I could improvise from available materials. I wasn't planning to hurt anyone permanently, just convince them that cooperation was in their best interest. The service road was exactly as I'd remembered: narrow gravel track winding through pine trees, designed to let utility trucks reach the house without disturbing the scenic main approach. Security cameras covered the intersection with the main road, but the trees blocked their view after the first 100 yards. I followed the road for half a mile before cutting into the woods, using a compass and GPS coordinates to navigate toward the house. The storm made progress slow and treacherous. Fallen branches blocked the path every few yards, and the ground had turned to mud that sucked at my boots with each step. But the weather also provided perfect camouflage, reducing me to just another shadow moving through the darkness. The house appeared through the trees like something from a magazine spread, every window blazing with warm light, the wraparound deck protected by elegant awnings that kept the rain from spoiling the expensive outdoor furniture. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see figures moving around inside, gesturing animatedly in what looked like heated discussion. Perfect. Nothing like a family argument to keep people distracted from their surroundings. I approached from the north side, where a grove of mature oak trees extended almost to the foundation. The security system's motion detectors were positioned to cover approaches from the water and main driveway, but they'd apparently assumed that no one would be crazy enough to hike through a thunderstorm just to spy on their private conversations. Their assumption was about to be tested. The first-floor windows were 8 feet off the ground, but a decorative trellis provided easy access to the deck that wrapped around the entire structure. I climbed carefully, testing each handhold before trusting it with my full weight. The rain made everything slippery, but it also muffled any sound the wooden structure might make under my weight. From the deck, I could see directly into the main living area, where my targets had gathered around a massive stone fireplace. Dominique sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, while Sasha paced back and forth with the nervous energy of someone under pressure. Garrett stood with his back to the window, gesturing toward what looked like legal documents spread across the coffee table. I activated the digital recorder and pressed it against the window glass, where it would capture their conversation with reasonable clarity. Then I settled into a position where I could observe without being seen, protected by the darkness and the rain that streaked down the windows. "Can't keep stalling forever," Sasha was saying. "He's already figured out more than we anticipated. If he starts digging deeper..." "He won't." Garrett's voice carried the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling situations through money and influence. "Vic's a blue-collar guy who fixes things for a living. He's not equipped to handle complex financial arrangements or legal strategies." "You didn't see him at the house," Dominique said. "He knew about the text messages. He knew about us. He even knew about Sasha's involvement somehow. Because you got careless with your phone." Garrett turned from the window, and I got my first clear look at his face. Handsome in the way that money could buy. Perfect teeth, professional haircut, skin that suggested regular spa treatments. But knowing about an affair isn't the same as understanding the bigger picture. What if he does understand? Sasha stopped pacing and moved closer to the fireplace. What if he's been planning something this whole time? Like what? He's a contractor, not a criminal mastermind. Garrett picked up one of the documents from the coffee table. Besides, it's too late to change course now. The papers are filed, the accounts are established, and the timeline is already in motion. What papers? Dominique leaned forward in her chair. You said we were just exploring options. I said I was handling the legal details so you wouldn't have to worry about them. Garrett's tone carried a note of impatience that suggested they'd had this conversation before. Trust me, Nikki. By the time Vic figures out what's happening, he'll be in no position to stop it. I pressed the recorder more firmly against the glass, making sure it captured every word of what was clearly a more complex scheme than simple adultery. Whatever they were planning involved legal documents and financial arrangements that went far beyond ending a marriage. Explain it to me again, Dominique said. All of it. I need to understand exactly what we're doing. Garrett returned to the coffee table and began organizing the papers into neat stacks. Phase 1 was establishing your unhappiness with the marriage and creating documentation of Vic's erratic behavior. The disappearing act, the financial manipulation, the surveillance, it all supports a narrative of a man having a breakdown and becoming potentially dangerous. But he's not dangerous, Dominique protested. Angry, yes, but Vic would never hurt anyone. The court doesn't know that. They only know what we tell them. Sasha joined Garrett at the table, pointing to specific documents. The restraining order application describes a pattern of escalating behavior that suggests domestic violence potential. The psychological evaluation requests emergency intervention before the situation becomes critical. Psychological evaluation? Standard procedure in contested divorces involving allegations of mental instability, Garrett explained. Once the court orders an evaluation, Vic will be required to undergo extensive testing and counseling before he's allowed any contact with you or access to shared assets. I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through my jacket. They weren't just planning to end our marriage, they were planning to destroy my reputation and steal everything I'd worked to build. How long does that process take? Dominique asked. 6 months minimum, possibly longer if the evaluator finds evidence of serious psychological issues. Garrett smiled, and the expression made him look like a shark that had just sensed opportunity. During that time, you'll have full control of all marital assets and complete freedom to make whatever arrangements you choose for the future, including marriage to you, including whatever makes you happy. Sasha moved to the window where I was hiding, and for a moment I thought she'd spotted me. But she was just looking out at the storm, watching lightning illuminate the lake in brief, brilliant flashes. What if Vic fights the evaluation? She asked. What if he gets a lawyer and challenges the whole process? With what money? Garrett laughed. His business accounts were cleaned out along with the personal ones. By the time he realizes what's happening, he'll be broke, isolated, and facing a legal system that's already decided he's unstable. That seems... Dominique hesitated, clearly struggling with the implications of what she was hearing. That seems cruel, even for a divorce. Divorce is war, Nikki. The side that strikes first and hardest usually wins. Garrett moved behind her chair, placing his hands on her shoulders in a gesture that looked possessive rather than comforting. Vic had 22 years to make you happy. He failed. Now it's my turn. But taking everything is exactly what he did to you when he disappeared with the money. Sasha turned from the window, her expression hard with the kind of anger that suggested personal investment in the outcome. He humiliated you, Nikki. Made you look like a fool in front of your friends and co-workers. Why should you show him mercy when he showed you none? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, revealing details that made my situation far more precarious than I'd realized. They'd been planning this destruction for months, building a legal case that would paint me as an unstable, potentially violent man who posed a threat to his wife's safety and well-being. The affair with Garrett was just one component of a larger strategy designed to leave me with nothing. No money, no reputation, no legal recourse. They'd underestimated me in every possible way except one. They were absolutely right about the stakes involved. This was war. I climbed down from the deck as carefully as I descended, every movement deliberate and silent despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The walk back to the truck felt different than the approach, less cautious, more purposeful. I'd come to the lake house looking for information about their plans. Instead, I'd discovered that the game was already over unless I changed the rules immediately. The recording device had captured everything. Their admission of filing false legal documents, their plan to steal marital assets through fraudulent psychological evaluation, their conspiracy to destroy my life for no reason beyond greed and convenience. Evidence that would destroy their credibility if presented to the right people at the right time. But evidence was only useful if you lived long enough to present it. I reached the truck as another wave of thunder rolled across the lake, shaking the ground with enough force to set car alarms wailing in the distance. The storm was intensifying, which meant I had maybe an hour before weather conditions made driving dangerous. An hour to implement a plan that would turn their strategy against them. An hour to prove that the dog's bite was worse than they'd imagined. I started the engine and pulled onto the highway, heading back toward town with the kind of focused determination that had built my business from nothing into something worth stealing. They wanted to play games with legal documents and psychological evaluations? Fine. But they were about to discover that some games had consequences they'd never considered. The dog had learned to bite. Now it was time to go for the throat. The Morrison and Associates annual charity gala was the kind of event Dominique had always loved. 500 of the city's most influential people gathered in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, writing checks for worthy causes while networking their way to bigger opportunities. She'd attended for 8 consecutive years, always with me as her reluctant escort, always making sure to introduce me as my husband the contractor, in a tone that suggested both pride and mild embarrassment. This year, she'd be attending alone, or so she thought. I'd purchased my ticket 3 weeks ago, back when I was still planning a more subtle approach to our marital problems. The black tie event had seemed like neutral ground, where we might have a civilized conversation about our future, away from the emotional weight of our shared home. But that was before I'd learned about their conspiracy to destroy my life. Now the gala represented something entirely different, the perfect venue for a very public reckoning. I'd spent the morning at Riverside Formal Wear, renting a tuxedo that fit better than anything I'd owned in 20 years. The elderly tailor, a man who'd probably dressed half the city's business leaders over the past 4 decades, had taken obvious pride in transforming a rough-looking contractor into someone who could pass for respectability. "You clean up nice," he'd said, adjusting the bow tie with professional precision. "Special occasion?" You could say that. The afternoon had been devoted to final preparations. I'd copied the audio recording from the lake house onto multiple flash drives, each one labeled with the name of a different Morrison and Associates client or business partner. The printed transcripts were organized into neat folders, ready for distribution to anyone who might find the contents interesting. Most importantly, I'd prepared the presentation that would serve as the evening's entertainment. The grand ballroom was exactly as I remembered from previous years. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over round tables draped in white linen, a small stage where the evening's speakers would make their appeals for charitable donations, and a bar area where the real business of the evening would be conducted over expensive whiskey and carefully crafted small talk. I arrived early before the cocktail reception began and made my way to the audio-visual booth where a young technician was setting up equipment for the evening's presentations. "Excuse me," I said, approaching with the kind of confident authority that suggested I belonged there. "I'm Victor Mercer from Morrison and Associates. We need to make a last-minute addition to tonight's presentation schedule." The technician, a college-aged kid who probably made minimum wage to operate equipment worth more than his annual salary, looked up from a tangle of cables. "I don't have anything on my schedule about changes. That's because it just came down from Dave Millant's office. I handed him a flash drive and a printed instruction sheet I'd prepared. Priority presentation, to be loaded as backup in case of technical difficulties with the main program. I really should check with... Dave's already left for the evening, and this needs to be ready in case we have problems. I pulled out my wallet and extracted a $100 bill, placing it on the equipment table. I'd really appreciate your help with this. It's important. The money disappeared into his pocket with practiced efficiency. What kind of presentation is it? Company recognition program, employee appreciation, that sort of thing. I watched him load the flash drive into the system, noting which buttons he pressed to access the presentation queue. Just make sure it's ready to go if we need it. No problem, Mr. Mercer. I left the booth and made my way to the bar, where early arrivals were already gathering for the kind of networking that made these events profitable for everyone involved. The bartender, a professional who'd probably worked every major event in the city over the past decade, mixed drinks with the kind of efficient precision that suggested he'd be busy all evening. Scotch, neat, I said, settling onto a bar stool where I could observe the entrance. Coming right up. He poured 2 fingers of single malt into a crystal tumbler. Haven't seen you at one of these before. First time flying solo? Ah. He nodded with the understanding of someone who'd served drinks to divorced men at dozens of similar events. Well, it's a good crowd tonight. Should be interesting. Interesting was one way to put it. Dominique arrived at 7:30, making an entrance that drew appreciative glances from half the men in the room. She'd chosen a black cocktail dress that emphasized every asset while maintaining professional dignity, paired with jewelry I'd given her for our 15th anniversary. Her hair was styled differently than usual, more sophisticated, more expensive looking, and her makeup had been applied with the kind of professional skill that suggested a spa afternoon. She looked stunning, confident, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Sasha Klein followed 5 minutes later, wearing a red dress that was probably intended to complement Dominique's black ensemble. They'd clearly coordinated their appearances, presenting themselves as successful, independent women who'd moved beyond whatever domestic drama had previously constrained their social activities. Garrett Stone made his entrance at 8 p.m. sharp, timing his arrival to coincide with the beginning of the formal program. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room, stopping to shake hands and exchange pleasantries with potential business contacts. The 3 conspirators found each other within minutes, forming a small cluster near the auction display, where they could observe the crowd while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. From my position at the bar, I could see their body language, relaxed, celebratory, the posture of people who believed their problems were solved. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The evening's program began with welcoming remarks from the hotel manager, followed by a presentation about the children's hospital that would benefit from the night's fundraising efforts. Worthy cause, deserving organization, exactly the kind of charity that made wealthy people feel good about writing large checks. I waited until the formal presentations concluded and the auction began before making my move. The podium microphone was still active from the previous speaker, connected to the sound system that filled the entire ballroom. I approached the stage with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, ignoring the surprised looks from audience members who were expecting the next auction item to be announced. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room's excellent acoustics. "I'd like to take a moment to talk about a different kind of charity tonight." The crowd's attention shifted from confused murmuring to focused silence. At their table near the auction display, I could see Dominique's face go pale as she recognized my voice. My name is Victor Mercer, and until recently, I believed in the importance of trust, loyalty, and keeping private matters private. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the audience until it found the 3 conspirators. But some situations require public accountability. Dominique was already moving, rising from her chair with the clear intention of stopping whatever was about to happen. But Garrett caught her arm, probably calculating that interrupting my speech would draw even more attention to their table. Smart man. Too bad he wasn't smart enough to avoid this situation entirely. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that my wife of 22 years was having an affair with her college boyfriend. The admission created a ripple of uncomfortable shifting throughout the audience. This wasn't the kind of entertainment they'd expected with their charity dinner. Adultery is painful, but it's not uncommon. What made this situation special was the conspiracy that surrounded it. I reached into my jacket and withdrew one of the printed transcripts, holding it up where the entire room could see it. You see, my wife and her lover didn't just want to end our marriage. They wanted to destroy my life completely. They filed false legal documents claiming I was mentally unstable and potentially violent. They planned to steal every asset I'd worked 20 years to accumulate. They conspired to leave me broke, isolated, and defenseless against a legal system they'd manipulated with lies. The murmuring grew louder as audience members began to understand that they were witnessing something far more dramatic than a typical charity auction. Some people were already reaching for their phones, no doubt preparing to record whatever happened next. Perfect. The more documentation, the better. But here's the thing about conspiracy, I continued, my voice growing stronger as I warmed to my subject. It only works when all the conspirators keep their mouths shut. And these three made the mistake of discussing their plans where someone might overhear them. I gestured toward the audio-visual booth, where the young technician was watching with obvious fascination. Could you please start the backup presentation? The lights dimmed, and the large screens positioned around the ballroom came to life with audio waveforms and timestamp data. Then the voices began, crystal clear, perfectly audible, devastating in their casual cruelty. Garrett's voice filled the room. Phase 1 was establishing your unhappiness with the marriage and creating documentation of Vic's erratic behavior. The audience listened in stunned silence as the recording revealed the full scope of their conspiracy. False legal documents, fraudulent psychological evaluations, plans to steal marital assets through systematic deception. Every word was damning. Every admission was another nail in the coffin of their reputations. I watched Dominique's face as she heard her own voice discussing the timeline for my destruction. The confident woman who'd entered the ballroom an hour ago was being replaced by someone who understood that her carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. Sasha had gone completely white, probably calculating how the recording would affect her career at Morrison & Associates. Conspiring to file false legal documents wasn't just morally reprehensible, it was potentially criminal, the kind of behavior that could result in disbarment for any lawyer foolish enough to participate. But it was Garrett's reaction that interested me most. Instead of panic or embarrassment, his face showed something that looked almost like admiration. He was watching me with the attention of a professional recognizing superior strategy, perhaps finally understanding that he'd underestimated his opposition. The recording concluded with his own voice. Divorce is war, Nikki. The side that strikes first and hardest usually wins. I let the silence stretch for several seconds before returning to the microphone. He was right about one thing, I said. Divorce is war, but he made the mistake of assuming I didn't know how to fight. The audience erupted in a mixture of applause, shocked murmuring, and the kind of excited chatter that suggested this event would be discussed at dinner parties for months to come. Several people were openly recording with their phones now, ensuring that the evening's entertainment would reach far beyond the ballroom's physical boundaries. Dominique finally broke free from Garrett's restraining grip and began pushing through the crowd toward the stage, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. But she was too late to prevent what had already happened. The recording had been heard by 500 of the city's most influential people, including clients, business partners, and social contacts, whose opinions would determine her future prospects. "You're insane!" she shouted as she reached the foot of the stage. "This is harassment. This is accountability," I interrupted, still speaking into the microphone, so my response carried throughout the room. You wanted a man who takes control, Nikki. You wanted someone who makes bold decisions and isn't afraid of consequences. I smiled down at her, the same cold smile I'd given her in the garage 3 weeks ago. Congratulations! You got exactly what you asked for. Security guards were moving through the crowd now, probably summoned by hotel management to deal with the disruption. But they were too late to prevent the damage that had already been done. The recording was public, the conspiracy was exposed, and the 3 people who'd planned to destroy my life were now facing the consequences of their own actions. I stepped down from the stage and walked calmly toward the exit, ignoring the chaos erupting behind me. Dominique's voice rose above the crowd noise, probably trying to offer explanations that no one would believe. Garrett was shouting something about privacy laws and illegal recording, as if legal technicalities could undo what 500 witnesses had just heard. Sasha had simply disappeared, probably calculating that her best chance of salvaging her career lay in immediate damage control rather than public confrontation. The hotel lobby was blissfully quiet compared to the ballroom, filled with the kind of peaceful atmosphere that suggested normal people conducting normal business. I paused at the front desk to return the tuxedo's accessories, cufflinks, bow tie, the formal wear that had served its purpose for the evening. "How was the event, sir?" the desk clerk asked politely. "Educational," I said. "Very educational." Outside, the storm from 3 nights ago had been replaced by clear skies and cool air that felt clean after the ballroom's stifling atmosphere. I walked to my truck, which looked distinctly out of place among the luxury cars that filled the hotel's valet parking area. But I'd never felt more comfortable in my own skin. The recording would be all over social media within hours, shared and reshared until it reached every corner of the city's business and social networks. Dominique's career at Morrison & Associates was probably over. No advertising firm could afford to employ someone who'd been publicly exposed as a conspirator in fraudulent legal proceedings. Sasha's situation was even worse, given that her participation in filing false documents could result in criminal charges. Garrett would survive, of course. Men like him always did, insulated by money and connections that could weather almost any scandal. But his reputation would be permanently damaged, his business relationships strained by association with the evening's revelations. They'd wanted to destroy my life through careful planning and systematic deception. Instead, they'd destroyed their own lives through arrogance and underestimation. I started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot, heading home to a house that would soon be mine alone. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, phone calls, and the complex process of rebuilding a life that had been targeted for demolition. But tonight, I was content to drive through the quiet streets of a city where everyone would soon know the story of 3 conspirators who'd made the mistake of kicking a patient dog one too many times. The dog had learned to bite, and the bite had drawn exactly the right amount of pain.